Hey, welcome back to the videos. This is going to conclude the little short chromatic series of videos. We've been looking at chromatic style banjo, mostly in melodic style, and showing how we can move some fingering positions for the left hand around. And I was going to show some more positions farther up the neck, but I got thinking about it today before I did this video, and I thought, well, these positions are all movable. You just move them across different spacings, different strings. They're always the same pattern, played the same distance apart, and the fingering for the right, the roll patterns or the note patterns for the right hand will always be identical. So instead of doing that, I thought maybe we'll just wrap this series up with some fun ideas. Now, one way to approach playing chromatic ideas is just to randomly assemble chromatic notes. But, that's really not very useful if you're trying to use them in a context of, say, Scruggs style, which most players want to do. So you're a good Scruggs player and you want some chromatic licks to throw in the melodic style. So you already know some melodic scale patterns, so now that we've examined in the previous video some of these positions, now you need to think, how can I use these in songs, or how can I make licks with them? What I like to do is take a standard lick, like Scruggs licks, which are great licks anyway, some of which have chromatic intervals in them, and I like to take them just a few steps further than what maybe Earl did, so that you have a frame of reference, which I'm always big about. Instead of plunging into something totally unknown, not knowing where you're at, have an anchor point, have a lick that you already know how to play, and then apply the concepts to the same old lick, and you get cool variations. So I've made a short list over here on a piece of paper to remind myself what we're going to go over, because there's so many licks and only 15 minutes in the video. So I'm just going to hit the highlights of some of the licks that I like. The Boogie Woogie lick is one of Earl's licks that has a built-in chromatic interval in it. So let me zoom the camera in. A little closer than that. There we go. And the standard lick has this half step. All the other notes are scale notes or chord-based notes. But we do have this chromatic interval from, say, for a G lick, from 3 to 4, and you have that happening 2 times in the lick. Right? That's the standard lick. Now, how can we extend it? Earl's already got a little chromaticism going on. I just decided maybe at the end of the lick to make it a little more chromatic and a little bluesier at the same time. I'm going to keep Earl's original half-step interval, but I'm going to make it just a little bluesier. His version is more boogie-woogie, kind of swingy, because it has a major 6. What I'm going to do is add another note from the blues scale. You've already got one note here. This is a blues scale note for the position, for G. And then I'm going to reach up here for my D flat, D as in David, which is a blues scale note also for the key of G, which relates to this G chord. So again, I'm referencing a position, but it also references a scale. A G blues scale has a B flat and a D flat note. So by going from this note, D to D flat, not only do I get a blues note, but I get another chromatic interval. So I have this one from Earl's original concept. There's a chromatic interval, and that's one of the positions we talked about in the previous video on the 2nd and 3rd string. It's movable. Everywhere you move it, you have a half-step interval. So I get something a little more bluesy, and because it's positional, no open strings. And you might say, well, wait a minute, John, isn't that same note, D flat? Couldn't I go here? But playing that note, for me, tends to pull my whole hand out of position. It's kind of a hard note to reach. This note seems to be easier with the pinky, but you do whatever works for you. Anyway, this is just some fun little variation on lick, and you might come up with 50 different cool variations just by experimenting with what I'm showing you. So just like everybody else's videos, just use what I show you here, just to give you some sparks for your own idea. Okay, so there's a pretty cool boogie woogie lick that has extended some chromatic stuff in it and another blues scale note. Let's talk about the combination lick, which is one of those licks that we all hear as Scruggs players. And I call it the combination because it uses combinations of all three chords, in this case G. Here's the standard lick. Sometimes it's played with a choke, but I'm going to play mine with that little slide. Now, how could we add some chromatic flavor to that? Well, just pick a spot. And you can decide how many notes you want to put in. You may notice that I'm changing the syncopation, the rhythmic accents are a little bit different from Earl's version. So it's actually maybe a little more swingy than his version. And I'm playing around with the durations of the notes. Da 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 da. So you can get some pretty wicked syncopations by allowing notes to ring slightly longer than they normally would, and you're using different notes anyway, totally different notes than you'd use. You could even add another note. If you want to, you could work the second string down, but again, now this is that same 4-note positional idea that we talked about in the previous video that's movable. You move it a certain number of frets up and you get the same pattern repeated over and over. And I'm applying this to a standard lick. Now, what about the Sally Good position? Every good Scruggs player is familiar with this. It has a chromatic interval in it. A lot of times players complain about making that stretch. You're like, wow, that's a hard stretch. Well, one thing you can do is rearrange the notes. You could say, okay, what's that note? And for G, that actually happens to be a B flat note. Okay, you've got the same note right here, which is only 1 fret behind this partial position. So you're playing out of a G chord, right? But you're doing a partial version of the chord. So the note is right behind where you are anyway. So instead of making this kind of hard stretch, but it sounds cool. And then coming down on the 3rd string at 9 for your E minor / G position. Why not just use that 4-note position again? In the combination lick, we actually moved it up 1 fret higher than the G chord to resolve it back to the G. But what if you just planted that right over the G chord? So here's your whole G, here's the partial, here's the 4-note repeating chromatic pattern that we learned in the other video. And how could I apply that to the Sally Good lick? You notice what I'm doing with my fingers. I'm trying to mix together the chromatic 4-note pattern and then tie that into what I'm used to playing as a Scruggs player. And it seems hard at first, but if you really look at the positions, they're really not that far apart. It's a new pattern, yes, but you can learn it. I could even convert this to an E minor pattern because G and E minor are related scale-wise. E minor comes from the key of G, so that's why when you're playing Scruggs things, often you drop in this E note, so you have a G / E minor kind of built into each other. You can also change the fingering slightly from this 4-note pattern to this. You can come up with some pretty nice sounding chromatic ideas for E minor and G. So when you're playing the Sally Good position, see if you can superimpose this right over the partial, and you get some pretty cool chromatic ideas for that. Now, even down low, let me make sure I stay in the camera shot here. When you're playing down in the lower positions, you'll hear things like this, single string lick, which again, Earl's putting some pretty cool chromatic flavor into his lick. Maybe he's doing a going to push off from 3 to 2, which is B flat to A, which is a half step, and then he's coming back to 4 and back to 3. That's a cool lick. So how would you drop in some kind of chromatic idea that has some melodic fingering, mode of travel in it? Well, I might take this position, which is, the second and third string a whole step apart. And we're already familiar with this position, that's C and B flat, from things like. But we're thinking when we play this, individual notes wrapped together in a melody, right? Well, this is also a chromatic position. So now, if knowing that, that's a B to a B flat, and if I wanted to go another half step, I'd just play the open second. C, B flat, B. I can change directions. So I'm just going basically for the right hand, 2, 3, 2. Or if I want to go the other direction, 3, 2, 2. Now, if I mix that in with Earl's idea, then I get a hybridized version, if you want to call that. Again, I'm still using the open third, the 4th string at 2, kind of like Earl did in the end of his. Or I could resolve it to a D. Maybe for a quick G to D turnaround. So, again, you're probably familiar with these two notes, but you're thinking about playing blues licks, which most players get good at here. But these are two notes that are half step apart, so you can mix them up. And you could also, again, since G and E minor are related, they can be a couple of notes that are chromatic. That could be something pretty cool for an E minor position. So we've got the combo lick, the boogie woogie, the Sally Gooden position. Now we've got this single string low idea. And what about bar chords? We have some pretty cool licks out of bar chord positions. Here would be G at the 12th fret. This is a familiar lick, which again has some chromatic ideas in it. Has this B flat to B again, which is pretty common recurring interval for a G licks anywhere on the neck. So instead of sliding, you could say, well, that's a chromatic interval, B flat to B. And again, there's that one of those repeating positions that we've talked about that you can slide up and down the neck. It happened to be 3 frets apart on the 2nd and 3rd string. So instead of 2 frets apart, which sometimes is chromatic, sometimes isn't, depending on where you put it. Sometimes they could be 2 scale notes, like this case, that's a D and a C, which is a harmony, not dissonant. Sometimes they are dissonant. When you put the notes 3 frets apart, then you'll always have that chromatic interval. So now if I wanted to do something chromatic with this lick, I could go, and what if I wrapped that around one of the scale notes? Open 5th. So, and again, that's a movable shape, so there's a C. If I want to resolve it, I can come back to the 3rd string. So I'm just rolling basically, in this case, 3, 2, 1. And I'm holding the 1st string at 12, 2nd string at 12, 3rd string at 15. So there you go. There's some fun ideas. And again, it's based on licks that Earl's already done. So start with those licks, add some chromatic ideas to that, and have fun. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching this series.